This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self.
Hey there, everybody. It's Rosie. My friends from Vital Work, Rebecca Johnson and Natalie Johnson, passionately help leaders and teams function at full capacity. This new series, Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work, breaks down those three elements essential to a thriving workplace. Take a listen.
Hi there. Welcome to Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work. I'm Natalie Johnson.
And I'm Rebecca Johnson.
And Rebecca and I are here to talk to you today about mental energy. And mental energy is really about where we're choosing to focus our energy. And oftentimes, in talking about mental energy, it can get confused with mental health. And so, certainly, our ability to focus and create clarity in our life can impact our mental health. But what we're really focusing on today is focus, our ability to focus our mental energy on things and people that are important to us. And we're also talking about some of those barriers, because if any of you are like us, we pretty consistently run into things that get in the way of us being able to focus. So I often think about over time, we have all these technological advances that have occurred. And I think we've just been very reactive to that happening. And maybe this comes from my background in human performance, but I'm always thinking about how are we training? How are we training to be better in life? And how are we training to be able to mentally focus better? And what we know about training is that whatever our body and brain are exposed to most consistently is what our body and brain are going to respond to. And so I know if I think about my own life, I am consistently exposed to lots of distractions, everything from trying to get work done and my email notifications are coming up to my phone dinging to someone walking into my office to I go to get on a site and then the purse that I shopped for yesterday pops up and then all of a sudden I'm shopping for purses. And I think what has happened for me for sure is that I'm exposing my brain to a lot of multitasking and distractions. And there's probably in many ways more consistency around multitasking. And so perhaps, myself included, we're training our brain to not be focused and be more reactive to what's going on in our life. And so, Rebecca, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know that this is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I think that's true because currently in my life, mental energy is one of the greatest challenges I have around energy. I feel very aligned around spiritual energy and purpose. I know how to take good care of my emotional energy. I do a good job around physical energy, but mental is the place where I have the biggest challenge. And what's really interesting about that is that that has not always been so for me. And in fact, for most of my life, I prided myself on being a person with strong mental focus. When I think back to myself in my 20s, 30s, maybe even my early 40s, I was always a person that could figure out quickly in the moment, like what's most important to do with my time and energy. I was good at prioritizing, I could execute on things, and I felt in charge of my own brain's attention. I remember even years ago when I was working in a cubicle setting, and this was many years ago because Sophia was a baby and she's 14 now. So I remember even a couple of colleagues randomly commenting on my ability to get things done and be mentally focused. But I would say over the last 5 years, I have experienced a gradual shift in my ability to focus, not for the better. I often feel mentally scattered and overwhelmed. I can still kind of figure out what's priority in any moment, but it always feels like there's competing priorities. It often feels like there's a million things pulling at my energy, and my brain is having to work really hard to figure out what's important to stay focused on that thing. And so I started to wonder a few years ago why this was happening to me. Is it just me? Is this happening to other people? And how is this related to technology? And at that same time, when I was kind of initially having those wonderings, we were also putting together a training for a client on mental energy. So I started to do some research around the relationship between technology and environment and mental energy. And I remember I stumbled across this article in the Atlantic magazine, and it came with a chart. And we actually still use that chart in some of our trainings because it's so telling. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about what this article validated for me anyway, and that we now share with our clients about how mental energy is impacted by the changes in technology in our environment. And then we'll talk a little bit about practices that people can enact to take better charge of their mental energy. So, in this research, what was validated is that, let's just think if we go back to like the time frame of 1900. At that point, there were really only three ways that people could communicate with each other or swap information. So they could talk person to person, they could write something, or they could read something. And the research indicates that the average person spent maybe like 6 out of every 24 hours talking with another person, reading or writing. And so if you think about it, that means that there was all of this time available in each person's every day for doing other things that mentally recharge and reset us. So then if you fast forward to, let's say, 1950, the environmental situation is pretty much the same. You just add in the telephone. So at that point, most homes have a phone. So that means there's four ways that people can be communicating and swapping information. And the average person in 1950 was spending maybe 7 hours out of every 24 doing one of those things. So if you think about this 50-year span of time, the human brain had quite a bit of time to evolve and adapt to a little bit more technology. But then if you look at what has happened between 1950 and now there are 15 or 20 different ways that we can communicate with each other or swap information. And many of us are engaging in one or more of those, sometimes at the same time, for 11, 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So, what I mean by that is that you might be watching television, you might have your phone with you, you might be scrolling through social media, you might be responding text messages, you might be trying to have a conversation with someone. All of those things are happening at the same time. And that, of course, is very taxing on the brain. So, what was helpful about this for me is that it helped me understand that there have been these really big shifts that have happened in our environment around technology that my brain has not had time to adapt to managing well. And when you combine that with our brain's own wiring, the brain is designed to think and it loves to move from idea to idea and it loves to mind wander and be distracted. When you put the nature of our brains together, combined with technology, what you get for many of us is days where our mental energy is scattered and depleted. And that means that if we are going to really take charge of our mental energy, if we're going to get better at prioritizing and focusing and doing one thing at a time, to your point, Natalie, we really have to train. We have to do some internal training. We have to develop some internal practices that help us take better charge of our mental energy. And we're also going to have to make some changes in our environment. So, we're going to share some of those practices with you all in just a minute. But before we do that, Nat, I'm always curious about this with regard to you, because I know for me, mental scatter and overwhelm is kind of a big problem, but I've never been sure if it's actually a problem for you or not. You seem to have better charge in this area. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think before I answer your question directly, something came up for me when you were talking that I've never really thought about, which was over time, I think the technology advances earlier on were very slow. Like, oh my gosh, we have TV now. And then it was just TV. And oh my gosh, we have TV and phone. So there was time to actually adapt to that. And I think if you fast forward to today, technology is advancing so quickly. We have so many things that we're just not able to adapt. And instead, we're all just reacting to it. React, 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 react all over the place. And I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. And so, what it really entails to bring more focus and clarity and to reduce distractions is we kind of have to take a step back. Let's take a step back and look at what it would require so that we could adapt to this instead of reacting. And so, I'll go back to your question of that sometimes it doesn't seem like it's an issue. I think I just have maybe what I've become accustomed to, which is a regular norm of I feel distracted. There's lots of things going on, but I'm going to take this little tiny bit of short time and only focus on these one or two things. And if I can get through these one or two things, it's okay. But then I unconsciously just start multitasking again. And so we can get things done when we're multitasking, but obviously the quality of my work when I'm doing that isn't great. And so I think I'm just better at not showing it and talking about it. I still feel it. I feel the unfocused, but if I can get through those one or two things undistracted, and make progress, then I'm kind of just okay with being distracted and not being as productive the rest of the day. And I'm not even saying that's a good thing, but that's kind of what's realistically happening. I'm reminded of Rebecca and I have this conversation about mental energy quite often, and we both facilitate and talk about it. And I tend to lean more towards talking about mental focus and clarity in the long term, just in terms of being able to keep your eye on the long term goal of where you're trying to go in your life. And is your energy being distributed in the places that are going to get you there? Or are you getting distracted and getting off path and you're expending energy on people and things that don't matter? And so my brain tends to go more in the long term, which means I tend to check in on my story way more often than I tend to do things like, let me shut my phone off or let me close off email so I can do this thing. What I tend to naturally do in my brain more often is, what is the story I'm telling myself about why I'm expending so much energy on this person or thing that doesn't matter? And how can I retell the story so I can come back and focus on what really matters?
Oh, that's so good. So I just got something, which is that when you realize your mental energy is not being directed in ways that really align with what matters most, what you do is you say, what is my story about why I'm doing that? I need to retell the story. And then I would think that once you retell the story, what happens is you end up doing different things. Like your redirection of story means that you start practicing the things like turning off your phone or closing out email or taking deep breaths or whatever that realign you with what's most important. And what I'm realizing is that I skip right past the story part and I just go to, okay, wait, I'm feeling scattered or overwhelmed. What do I need to do in the moment? And you're right that both parts of this are really helpful around mental energy. You have to be aware of what your stories are about why you are directing your mental energy the way you are. And then you also have to enact some practices that help you redirect to stay aligned with what's most important. But I love that idea that you check in on the story piece in a way that I don't. I don't think I got that. I love it.
And I'm giggling a little bit because this is like so representative of Rebecca and I and how we're so different because you're absolutely right. I tend to lean more towards let me check in on the story. And then I don't necessarily then go do things like let me bring more focus. Oftentimes, when I'm recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm giving this person or this thing way too much energy and it's not very important, let me check in on the story. I change the story. And what I do are things like, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and quit asking so many questions so we can shut this conversation down and I can go back to what's important. So I might still be multitasking around the things that are important. But what I do instead is I create a boundary around me and the thing where I'm recognizing that is not serving me well. Let's instill some kind of boundary so I'm getting less of that and hopefully none of that in the future, and then move more towards what I need to focus on. But that doesn't mean that I'm not multitasking. I'm just expending energy on 3 or 4 things that seem more important than that other thing, typically.
That's so interesting that you say the word boundary because to be really truthful about it, taking charge of your mental energy requires both. It requires usually enacting boundaries with other people and things that are not aligned with purpose or what's most important. And it also requires enacting some practices that we do right now and in the moment over and over. And I think that's true with all forms of energy management is that to really take charge of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual energy, it's a combination of enacting boundaries with other people and other things and enacting practices where you're actually sort of doing something different. So it does feel like a bit of a challenge for you, but what you do around it is a little bit different than what I do. So it's not like it's not a problem. It just maybe doesn't feel like it's pressing a problem. It's just that what you do with it is a little different.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, got it. So let's share a few ideas that we have for harnessing mental energy, resetting, redirecting, making sure that our mental focus is focusing on the right things. So, just to kind of share with people how we think about this, we'll often think about internal strategies, right? So, that's the work that I need to do inside. Those are my mental fitness training techniques. And then there's also external strategies. And external strategies are just the changes I'm going to make in my environment, which is now very noisy and interruptive to support the type of focus that I want to have. So, do you want to start, Nat, with a couple of your favorite strategies, whichever bucket they fall into?
Oh my gosh. So I would say the thing I do the most is when I'm starting to feel impatient, unfocused, and I think about where am I focusing my energy right now? And I realize it's not in alignment with where I should be. I definitely ask myself, what's the story I'm telling myself about why I need to be spending time on this person or this thing? And then the other thing that I do on a regular basis, definitely more regularly when I'm traveling than not, is I try to expose my brain to some training of focus now, be in the moment, focus now, be in the moment. And that means taking 5 to 7 minutes. I personally like the Calm app to try to get my brain to focus and do some mindfulness meditation. And mindfulness meditation, for those of you out there that might not know, that is the mental fitness training for the brain. Mindfulness meditation is training the brain to be in the moment, and your mind will wander, and that's okay. That's what we need to happen in order to get better at it. So I would say if we're going to give top three, it's a pause. What's the story I'm telling myself? A regular kind of intentional training around meditation and mindfulness. And I use deep breathing a lot just to pause and create a little bit of space so that I can focus and be more calm and patient in the moment.
I know you pretty well, and I didn't know that you practiced any mindfulness meditation. I love that you do.
In the hotel, in bed still, when I wake up, pick up the phone, turn it on. And it's more consistent, obviously, when I'm traveling, but it's when I'm traveling that I don't get interrupted by husband getting up, kid getting up for school, things get in the way, dog. When I'm just by myself, I know that it will happen. And because it's only 5 to 7 minutes, it happens.
Yeah. And so, also for those of you that listening, thinking like, oh, I don't know if mindfulness or meditation is for me. One of the things to remember is that that is the direct equivalent of biceps curls and squats at the gym. If you want a stronger body, you go to the gym. It's not comfortable. You don't do it perfectly, but you do it and you get stronger. Mindfulness meditation is like that for the brain. It's not about achieving some woo woo state or sitting cross legged and chanting. It's just a practice we do that's designed to help us get mentally stronger. So, my aim has been also to do more mindfulness meditation. I'm kind of off and on with that, but I 100% see and experience the value in it when I practice it. Well, I'll focus maybe more on external strategies. So, two that I do a lot are I find my phone to be the number one external distractor and interrupter. So, if I'm wanting to carve out some time at work where I'm focusing on one thing or I'm wanting to be present with people, my brain does better when I can just literally turn my phone off and get it out of my line of sight, put it in my purse, put it in a drawer. I literally feel a physical relief and I feel my brain having more freedom to be present. So I turn my phone off pretty frequently. And the second thing I do is particularly when I can see that I'm going to have a stretch of busy weeks and there's not organically going to be a lot of time for uninterrupted deep work, I will carve that on my calendar. So 1 or 2 hours, I'll just literally put deep work in the title. And now you and the team know that if you see that on my calendar, that's not a time to schedule a meeting unless absolutely necessary. And for me, that gives my brain permission to close email, get rid of all the small things, and just do some deep thinking or uninterrupted work. So those are my two external strategies. Anything you would add to that, Nat?
I think the only thing I'll add is I think it could feel scary to some people to turn their phone off. And as a person who experiences it from a person I work with a lot that they turn their phone off, it's like so not a big deal. Nobody cares. We just know, oh, she probably got her phone off. I'll hear her back in an hour or so. There's not typically anything work wise necessary where we ever feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she has her phone off. I think that could feel scary for some people. So I think the last thing that we'll leave everyone with today is our one big thing. And so, what we're asking everyone to do, if you feel inclined and you feel like mental energy is something you could work on, is we want you to choose a practice that's going to help you take charge of your own mental energy. And so maybe it's something that Beck and I have mentioned we do in our own lives, or maybe you need some additional resources. We're providing a 1 page PDF that gives some options of some other strategies that might work for you. And then the other part is once you've identified a mental training practice that might work for you, it's going to get really difficult. Things don't always go well. There's going to be interruptions. And so when it gets difficult to create a boundary or turn your phone off or have that deep work, what are you going to do? What's your backup plan? And so we hope that's helpful for you. Again, we'll leave you with that downloadable one page with resources, and we appreciate you being with us here today.
Bye, everybody.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.